Okay, so Tom Brown of TGB Promotions says that, and if those of you who don't know who Tom Brown is, he's basically, or allegedly, a front for Al Heyman. Because we know that Al Heyman is an advisor. He's not officially a promoter. And in the United States, they have the Muhammad Ali Act, which prohibits somebody from being a fighter's manager and also their promoter. So Al Heyman certainly advises, potentially promotes, certainly advises and potentially manages many fighters. Okay. Technically that's illegal. Therefore calls himself a advisor rather than a manager to get around that, and doesn't call himself a promoter. He has these people like Tom Brown promote his shows for him. So anyway, Tom Brown says that they, as in PBC or Tom Brown Promotions, whatever, offered Canelo $45 million for Jamal Charlo, $55 million for Spence at 164, or Benevidez at 168. So they were offering him a 2-fight deal where he would fight Charlo and Spence, or Charlo and Benevidez. Now, Canelo chose to go in a different direction and instead take Eddie Hearn and DAZN's offer. I'm not sure what the numbers were for Eddie Hearn and DAZN's offer, but one thing I will say, at this stage of Canelo's career, of course money's important and he's trying to maximize his earnings and what have you. But I think legacy is also important for Canelo, because you come from a country like Mexico, those US dollars are going to go far. Do you know what I mean? Very far. I mean, they're going to go far even in the US, but in Mexico, they're going to go even further. So when is enough money enough? I think that Canelo may be at a stage in his career where he's willing to take a little bit less in order to gain as far as his legacy. Now, I'm not saying he is taking less with the DAZN deal with regards to money. And I don't know how much he was paid, but I suspect that he may be willing to. Because, again, Tom Brown is saying here that he could have fought the reigning welterweight champion as a $100 million deal for the, I guess roughly, for the Charlo and then the Errol Spence fight. Now, the thing is, I can't see Canelo Alvarez getting down to 164. So that rules out the Errol Spence fight. The Charlo fight has some interest in terms of the fans. I mean, we saw Jake Paul rubbish there was an interview with Eddie Hearn and Jake Paul, and Jake Paul was rubbishing Bivol as an opponent for Canelo, saying, nobody knows him and all this kind of thing. Nobody wants to see that fight because Jake Paul, being a bit of a casual, obviously he boxes and whatnot, but he's showing his limitations in terms of his understanding of the sport, because casuals assume that just because somebody isn't known to the wider public that he can't be any good. And at the same time, they also think that if somebody's known, then they must be at a certain level. But that's not always the case. There are lots of fighters in boxing who aren't really known to the wider public, and they're actually much better than you would expect. A recent example would be, fairly recent, would be Andy Ruiz going into the Anthony Joshua fight, because the casuals were looking at Ruiz and they were saying this fight's a joke. I was one of the few people saying, actually, Ruiz is dangerous. Ruiz can hurt AJ. Ruiz, he's got fast hands. He's a very good counterpuncher. Like, this is a dangerous fight for AJ. Go back and look at my pre-fight video. One of the few people saying this is a dangerous fight. And Ruiz had a realistic chance of winning. I remember speaking to a friend of mine before the fight. And he was just, he was laughing when he was looking at this Ruiz. He's like, who's this guy that AJ's fighting? This fat guy. I was like, hey, don't sleep on this guy. You can fight, And he listens to me when I talk about boxing, because I'm the boxing guy in my circle, right? So he listens to me when I talk about boxing. And he's like, okay, maybe he can fight, but I just don't see how he's got a chance against AJ. I think he's too small. And that's a mistake that he made again, going into the Usyk fight. This friend of mine who's a casual boxing fan made the same. I said, why are you always banging on about fighters being too small? This is heavyweight, bro. Anybody who's like 210, 220 plus, if they hit you on the chin, they're not too small. You know what I mean? If they catch you right on the chin, they're not too small, bro. Steve Cunningham was like 210 pounds. Tyson Fury's like 255, 260 at the time. Gets hit on the chin, and Cunningham's not even a puncher like that. Hits Tyson Fury, it wasn't even on the chin, it was somewhere, I don't know, the forehead or something, on the eye. Hits Tyson Fury in the face. Drops him hard. All right, so never mind about this, oh, the so-and-so's too small, this, that, and the other. A whole different dynamic at heavyweight. Whole different dynamic. If you're good enough and you're small, you're big enough. That's what it is. So, yeah, anyway, with regards to the Andy Ruiz AJ fight, underestimating Andy Ruiz because of the way he looks, of course. You know, the casuals underestimating him, but also because of his lack of height. Or like, come on, this guy's short and fat. There's no way he's going to be able to do anything against AJ. Never heard of this guy before. Who is it? This is a joke. People were making memes about Ruiz before the fight, about what a joke it was. Of course, they were making a lot of memes after the fight too. One of the ones that was actually quite funny is a meme where people said they were canceling their gym membership. Because it's like all this money they're spending on gym to have abs and pecs and all this stuff. And then some fat guy comes in and smashes the Adonis to pieces. It's like, well, if fat guys can do this, what's the point of me going gym? I did quite like that meme. But anyway, that's a mistake that casuals often make. They think, oh, because no one's heard of the guy, he can't be any good. But the hardcore boxing fans knew Ruiz was dangerous, stylistically for AJ, and that he's a tough guy, he can take a good punch, and that he's, you know, got a good amateur career behind him and so on. Same or similar situation with Dmitry Bivol. Bivol, excellent amateur background, extensive career in the unpaid ranks. And as a professional, he hasn't put a foot wrong. He hasn't been spectacular in his performances. I don't think he's had a knockout other than, I think the last knockout he had might have been 2017. Long time since Bivol had a knockout. But he hasn't really been pushed close since that time. Certainly, you know, since he's been champion. All of his fights, he's won them comfortably on points. Yeah, there have been one or two rough moments along the way, but in terms of scorecards, he's won them all comfortably. So I think that that's also one of the reasons that people, especially the casuals, are underestimating Bivol, because he doesn't come with a reputation of being a killer. It's not like a Golovkin. It's not even like a Beterbiev. This is a guy who's beating people on points. He's not knocking people out. He's not messing people up. Do you know what I mean? So this is all part of what leads to people underestimating him. Now, as far as why Canelo was chosen to go down that road, again, the casuals are assuming that Charlo and Benevidez are tougher fights. Time will tell if they're tougher fights. But from a legacy perspective, I think I know why Canelo was chosen to go this route rather than fighting Charlo, Spence, Benevidez. Now, with regards to Spence, 164 is just not realistic for Canelo at this stage. He's outgrown certainly middleweight, and 164 is too close to middleweight. So that's not realistic. So forget about that. Charlo, well, yeah, there's a lot of money on the table, and he's certainly a higher profile fighter than Dmitry Bivol. And it's plenty of money involved in that and what have you. But Charlo is not even a 168 fighter. Think about it. Canelo Alvarez is undisputed at 168. So if you're talking about who he should feel obligated to fight in terms of cleaning up the division, in terms of settling any dispute about who's the best, you got to look at 168 fighters. And Charlo's not at 168. So really, you can't make an argument that Canelo has to face him because he's not even in Canelo's division. Charlo hasn't done anything at once. Let Charlo, like, being realistic, yeah? If Charlo really wants to make a case that he should be the guy that Canelo is fighting, then what he needs to do is step up to 168. Do you know what I mean? Fight some guys at 168. Maybe he fight Benevidez. And then the winner of that would stand a much better chance of getting the Canelo fight if he steps up to 168 and fights Benevidez. Now, of course, Benevidez is at 168, and he has a more legitimate claim to being the guy that Canelo should be fighting. Because although he doesn't hold a belt right now, Canelo's undisputed. He did used to hold a belt. And again, he's been at 168. I think his whole career, he's a big guy, Benevidez. So that's the only guy really at 168 that Canelo hasn't fought anybody of note, because he's beat Plant, he's beat Billy Joe Saunders, he's beat Callum. He's a quality man. Beat Callum Smith. It's only Benevidez left. So there's an argument that could be made there. But again, Benevidez doesn't have a belt at the moment. And if Canelo is thinking about becoming undisputed in 2 weight divisions, because that seems to be what he's aiming for, Benevidez right now is not part of that plan, if that's what Canelo's goal is. So obviously Dimitri Bivol is part of that plan. If he can beat Dimitri Bivol, that can then set up a fight with the winner of Artur Beterbiev against Joe Smith. But some people would argue that, hey, Canelo says he's talking about, excuse me, adjust my seat here. Canelo and DAZN are talking about a 3rd fight against Triple G. How does that factor in to this undisputed light heavyweight ambition? Because if he's willing to fight Triple G, and you have to assume that'll be at 168, why isn't he fighting Benevidez at 168? You know? And that's a good counterpoint, to be fair. That is a good counterpoint. Maybe it's a case of both DAZN, Showtime, PBC, whoever, not being willing to just do a 1-fight deal. So if he could do a 1-fight deal with DAZN and just fight Dimitri Bivol, and he intends to then, wait for the winner of Beterbiev and Joe Smith and unify with them, but have a fight in the interim, if he was on a 1-fight deal, he could do that fight, Dimitri Bivol, beat him, then come down to 168 and have a bigger fight. Well, let me not say bigger. No, it's not a bigger fight than the Triple G fight, but it's a fight which would satisfy his critics more. Let's just put it that way. To have a more critic-satisfying fight against Benevidez at 168 before then going back up to 175 to have the undisputed fight against the Beterbiev Joe Smith winner. Maybe Canelo would prefer to do that. I don't know. But that would be contingent on him signing a 1-fight deal with DAZN, then a 1-fight deal with PBC, and doing all that. Maybe that just wasn't possible. I don't know. It's all speculation. I'm not privy to the contracts. I'm not privy to the negotiations. But I did say this when Canelo was weighing up his options. I said that the public, particularly in America, would much prefer him to be fighting the Charlos and the Benevidezes of the world rather than fighting Dimitri Bivol. They're going to try and say that Bivol's a bum. That's what they're going to do. That's what they're going to do. Even though it's not true, that's what they're going to do. And lo and behold, that's exactly what's happened. But Bivol's not a bum. And if Canelo Alvarez beats this guy, particularly if he beats him impressively, and there's no controversy, massive credit, because this is not a washed up Kovalev. I know Kovalev was a bigger puncher than Dimitri Bivol, but Bivol is so much fresher. So much fresher. This is a guy who ostensibly lives the life. He's not out there doing all kind of wrong stuff like Sergey Kovalev, getting involved in all types of weird situations, jumping out of bushes at the early hours of the morning, howling like a wolf. Yo. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, that pertains to that situation that Kovalev had with that individual who accused him of hurting them and hurting their dog. You gotta be so. When I made a video about that, it was instantly demonetized. Can you imagine? I made a video about that legal issue that Kovalev had, and it was instantly demonetized. There was no swearing, there was nothing. I was literally reading from a boxing scene article. But because of the nature of the incident and the allegation, it was just instantly demonetized. Unbelievable. So I'm very careful not to even mention that thing again. have to talk around it and make inferences, and hopefully you can connect the dots. But if you read that article, that's what it said. Kovalev was alleged to have done what he did by way of an assault. And then when the individual threatened to call the police, he left. But then the next day, when the individual came out of their cabin or whatever, their house, Kovalev came out of a bush. I swear, Kovalev is a werewolf, bruv. Like, he was running around in the night howling at the moon. That's why he attacked the dog. He was howling at the moon. And then when he came back to his human state in the morning, you know, he crawled out of the bush all covered in scratches. He didn't know what had happened. And he tried to plead with the person, you know, don't go to the police and da. It's a full moon. You don't understand my condition. Anyway, enough of that. Back to Canelo. Yeah, I got no issue with the direction he's decided to go in. Undisputed in 2 weight divisions. Who can grumble? There's only really Benevidez that's got any case that Canelo should fight him to completely eliminate any doubts that Canelo's the best at 168. That's it. Charlo and Spence, they're not even in the same division. So that is what that is. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And I'm going to make a separate video about Canelo's ambition to go up as high as 201 pounds. Heavyweight, basically, to fight Alexander Usyk. A lot of people talking about that. But for now, I'll leave this story here.